Thank you very much for the invitation. For me, it's always a pleasure to be here in the backbone of Argentina, and I'm glad to be here with these financial experts. We have sort of like a psychology office, yes, a little bit. So I will not analyze you. I will try. I'm here with Hernán Busch from Banco Galicia, Nicolás from Santander, and Juan Ocampo from Banco Macro. Let me share a brief introduction, and we are in the midst of a change, and what is happening will be different from what happened previously. Let's imagine that we're heading towards normality, if possible. So how are you preparing? What is the situation like today, and how is the financial system preparing itself to tackle and to deal with clients in a context of normality? And we may think that there's a long-term process in Argentina, and we are in the midst of a change of the old and the new coexisting. So what is the financial situation? What is the credit market? Where is it, and how is it preparing for the new normal? First of all, I would like to underscore the important opportunity the financial system has in a process of normalization. If we take a look at the credit indicator over the GDP, Argentina has a credit over the GDP ratio of below 6%. This means that it's a small financial system, but it is solid and robust. But if we compare it with the average of the region, neighboring countries, etc., that ratio reaches 50%. And if we compare what Gustavo says, this normalization of the whole process, and we think about previous stages of Argentina, where Argentina had a more normalized economy, our country would be in a position. Talking about a more stable economy, more normalized economy involves a financial system that should be bigger. So this would force us to have a financial system that would be 5 times bigger than what it is now. And this only just recovering a system that when the situation was normal, that existed when the situation was normal. So this has to be a lever to normalize economy. We have a huge opportunity in front of us with a more normal system. We are starting with a country where the first 6 months there were signals from the government indicating a reduction of the rate, of the interest rate, and this is a sector that is very much incentivized by credit. It has obviously the seasons for the crops, but if analyzing the first quarter of 2024, where this normalization started for the financial system, which it was strongly reactivated, and sharing information one with the other. Expo Agro, where the farmers go and try to renew their machinery or they're starting the crop season, we saw a very active sector. So, to sum up this trigger that Gustavo mentioned, and if we see the average for the region, I think that the opportunity is to look at the Everest. How do I climb this mountain? But if we look backwards, the country was at the level and is at the level of having a bigger financial system. That's one of the major challenges that banks have ahead of them. I think that the role we have, us three, if we try to identify the opportunities we have in common, we know each other very well. And one of the big challenges that we've asked of you actually several times is how can we make things easier for you, simplifying them and focusing on what needs to be done with a role that activates production. And to echo these words, this wasn't so long ago. Less than 10 years ago, in the government, before the previous governments, we had these ratios. So not too long ago, we had that, and it could perfectly happen again. The financial system is prepared for that to happen and to accompany the process. The reality is that idle credits that exist in banks and the capacity for loans that we have is huge. But sometimes we hear that the bank only lends to the state. But it's a matter of demand. We would love to have these projects, and we sit down very often with our clients, and we realize that projects and ideas are not scarce in Argentina, but what is lacking is other things. And we are from commercial banks, I think, and what we want the most is for all of that to happen. We have the teams, we are prepared for the context to accompany us, and I think that several variables are, falling into place. And it's a year where decisions are difficult to make, especially in agriculture, because there are other drivers of the context that need to be considered. There's, the climate, there's uncertainty about what will be done, and we still have not seen a decision to normalize investments. But what we are seeing is that there's a will, and that's what we're looking for in banks. I definitely agree, and I would like to see, maybe what Juan says, 5 or 6% over the GDP. Very recently, we held a study, and for each worker, what amount of the GDP they generate. And so we were wondering, what will happen with credit? Well, credit will need to grow. And when Argentina normalizes credit and the amount of loans and credits that public or private banks are going to offer to the sector and to the country as a whole will be much higher. There's no doubt about that. I do agree with Hernán in the sense that demand is still not guiding this process. We still haven't found that sweet spot between supply and demand. But I think that banks are fully prepared. We have been protagonists in the severe drought that we suffered last year. Banks had a huge participation with good conditions, and we felt that we were part of the solution during that year. This year, the dynamic has changed. The dollars appeared, something that hadn't happened, especially because there was an expectation of devaluation. In March of this year, the system went more towards the dollar, and of course, it's Argentina. 1 or 2 months later, the pesos appeared again. So what we feel, and speaking with our clients, is that we're prepared. We have many challenges ahead of us, but in a normalization, I think that in this opportunity, this is it finds us in a good position. If we're alive with 6% of credits over the GDP, I think we're immortal. We have an extraordinary resilience. We've been following the level of debt in the agricultural sector, in the financial sector. Half is different from what was happening before. We have Vikings that have had a worse time, and you can't go much more below than 6%. So imagine that, okay, things are set, we're going to move towards the future. The credit demand. So producers who maybe today are resorting to you because they're having a hard time, they're recovering from the drought, they had problems. Do you see those people, or are you seeing people who are coming with new projects? I mean, probably there's less credit because the demand is not quite there yet because of the context. But are you starting to see different things when it comes to credit? More projects than last year, for sure. We're seeing this change in the context. We're seeing in the type of credit that was granted. Although I would like to be much more active with a demand that tractions things more, but we're starting to see certain projects, but we know that there are projects happening, but the moment in which you need to make that decision, it's still discuss. They come and consult about the credit, but they're not just, running towards it. There's still a gap against them, because if you take dollars and there's already a gap against you when you have to go towards the dollar. So that involves a cost. The interest rate in pesos in the long term appears to be expensive if you're thinking that these indexes will be maintained and the inflation on its way down. So there are still variables that are, finding their place. But if you compare with 6 months ago, there's a huge difference. That changed a lot. So they're having more work than 6 months ago. I want to revisit something that Nico said. Last year, credit was an absolute need. You had to just overcome these financial problems. And now credits are becoming an opportunity. So the credit will add value. Do I take it or not? I think that's what producers are analyzing. We see a lot of good predisposition to take credit, but that credit has to add value. And so since the indicators are not clear in terms of the future direction, although some are more clear than others, I think that we analyze more and more how much credit I take or not. Let's go to the more sophisticated credit takers. It makes us more creative in the terms of the financial solutions that we can offer. And with this increased level of sophistication, we understand that the results are very important when it comes to closing the financial year for each of the companies or the physical persons who engage in production. So that's really great. The fact that that is happening is excellent, because we see that this sector has many alternatives to reduce price risk, to reduce rate risks. So we have to start profiting more from this. And with the experience of last year, because of its need, it grew a lot. There was a devaluation around the corner. The peso was all over the place. So most of our clients had assets in dollars. They became indebted in dollars, and now it is reflected in their debt. So I think that naturally our clients will become more sophisticated.
Buen gerente financiero. No, se escucha ahí, perdón. Creo que en los últimos años teníamos que tener un buen gerente financiero.
In the last years, you had to have a good financial manager, but now we have to have a production manager. We have to be very efficient in production. Credits have to leverage the business. I think that's the thing. In a talk, someone said, I don't know if I should hire an accountant or an engineer to sell more. That's what drives Argentinians crazy. I don't think that banks are a synonym to credit. I think the things are a bit more complex than that. But sometimes when I go around, I notice, not being a sophisticated person, I don't know if I'm right to speak about this, but I think people sometimes lack sophistication, not when it comes to financing a project, but to handle the risk, to manage the surplus. So what is the relationship, or what do you expect the relationship to be between producers with a low level of sophistication that have to manage risk and surplus and banks? Are there questions about how to manage portfolios? Because I've been asked that question, and I just would like to know, are you noticing this type of inquiry, or if it is it 100% risk and 100% credit and that's all? I think we started noticing this from the moment where it was just defending yourself from inflation, and let alone when you had that dual economy. You have an activity that is governed by the dollar, and you had an activity that only allowed you to operate in pesos, the sales or the credits that you would take. But when you had to manage the surplus, you also had to find the way to place those flows into the future. So I think that that's when other instruments started appearing to defend that capital. Clearly, the producer tends to see these things, and it's a good thing because there's not a value reserve in their production. For that, we have to find the way to give it value. But it's not just, for the production, but it's a matter of looking where the markets are, because many people are, in production, but they're not looking forward in terms of the evolution of those sales. If in the last time the price went down of the product, and so today you have less value in that sense. So I think that the reality is that things are much more complex, more sophisticated, and it's important to manage the surplus, especially in an activity that has long periods of activity in terms of the use of capital, and other long periods of time where you will have to reapply them. Using these financial instruments, of course, leads to the appearance of other new instruments. We think that the key to things are credit, but financial entities have a palette of different financial services that, of course, we love to offer to producers and farmers. Liquidity is definitely an issue, quite interesting, actually, we discuss with clients. I think that there are several tools today, and maybe in the recent past there weren't so many, but you have possibilities of investing locally, investing abroad, and different, with sovereign debt, private investments. I mean, it will depend, of course, on if you have a tough skin or not, and if you believe Milei and Caputo and their financial plan to make a decision. And what Hernán was saying, yes, the idiosyncrasy may be to just say, well, I want to sleep assured, I have the grains. But honestly, sometimes that ends up being a cost, and we miss opportunities for not having that liquidity, not being able to invest it correctly. So the answer is we have to develop that further, and we have to pay more attention because opportunities will start to appear. In going back to your question, if the country becomes more and more normal, we will see more of this, as happens in the rest of the world. Maybe things are normalizing more quickly than expected. So I'm afraid that maybe the country will become normalized and we will still be behind schedule in a sense, because we haven't still adapted to that new normal. Well, I think that there will be more profit for those who start sooner rather than later. But of course, others can wait and see, and I think both approaches are right. I think that on the one hand, for credit and for coverage, we must always bear in mind, first, what you're trying to cover, and second, what the horizon is. Because there are products that have good coverage, but that have longer horizons because they're more volatile. Sometimes someone can come and say, oh, why didn't you invest in that? And maybe that instrument was correct, but the volatility plays against you. So it's good to know what your horizon is. Because if not, you'll invest in an instrument, you ask for more profitability, and this requires a long-term horizon. And then if you need the funds for your crop season, then it's detrimental for you. So the coverage of a short bridge may be one thing that you're looking for, or you can be looking for diversification. It's two different things, and it's part of what we're looking to do in terms of counseling or consultancy. Sometimes it's family businesses where the capital has different uses. Sometimes it's a reserve, a long-term reserve. So it's important to know how long they want to keep that reserve, or if it's just a way to not lose the value of this surplus that I would need in 30 days or 90 days.
I notice that when I see the different situations, let me clarify to the audience. I'm a porteño. I'm pretty ignorant in the field. I was convinced that cows were very kind and they offered us beef, but the scene is pretty much more complex. So I see that there's much more concentration in the farming industry of highly sophisticated companies, family businesses, and there's a diversification I call them new producers, like sort of Martians who do weird things. They provide service, crops. You are all a bit weirdos. You do some amazing stuff. But are banks ready for this panoply of different people? Or we are just focused on the traditional farmer or who rent their field? How do you get ready for that? I think that it's related to what we were saying before. The farmer goes to other sources of financing because we are not finding the way around, or because they feel we are not up to the level of what they need. The concentration level is real. We see 40,000 customers that are really concentrated. So if we see this number of producers that are already up there, so a big challenge is that because we do not make things easier. I think that the banking system has to take responsibility for the demands they make. They have to make things simpler. If you see the crystal ceiling of the debt in the financial system for the sector, talking about the whole of the ecosystem, the primary production, and the first ring of producers and services, suppliers and services, but there are other sectors that are covering up for the funding that banks do not provide. For example, when they purchase a tool or a machinery, they provide funding or financing. So the credit demand, from the point of view of capital, we banks are prepared to provide credits. But I think what we have to do is to take responsibility and make things simpler for the producer. I'm requesting from you the whole of information. I do not tell from a small hoarder to a big farmer, but little by little we started taking responsibility for that. And we have to start being more proactive in terms of credit and less demanding in terms of paperwork. Because sometimes banks love to talk about regulations, but if we want it, we want to lend a lot of money without having a credit file for a customer, in a paperless credit. But we always like to get acquainted with a customer. We always like to meet them, to know we are obliged to do so. But many times we say, I don't know, we could lend more than 1 billion pesos, but why don't we do so? We have to do things simpler, and we are going towards that way. What we see as a trend is that the input companies start contacting us and say, I'm going to make I contact you with one of my clients, but we need to make things easier. The playing field used to be clearer, and it got more and more sophisticated. There are companies that have diversified. There are new players in the business, and the bank had to rethink the way we service customers. So, the field sector is not just the producer. We have to think more broader terms. Now it's a panoply of different roles. There's a panoply of different roles. So you have to think of this in a more ecosystemic way, where you have specialists who try to service the producer, who's perhaps the heart. But you have to pay attention to the whole supply chain. And the bank tried to link the sale of a product or the input, the sale of crops at the end of the chain. But that is traced more and more, and those credits are spring with the purchase of inputs. And then there are other players who have other reasons on the basis of which they take decisions. So we need a model to finance agriculture or livestock farming, but there are other services that provide, that have some degree of industrialization, but they are integrated in the livestock farming, and they also have a financing role. So you need to take a different perspective on stuff. I think it's an interesting challenge because the farmer cannot grow otherwise, and they need integration. They start integrating among different players in the chain. So they start partnering with other producers. That is what we are seeing a lot. We are there to focus on those challenges. We have to improve our efficiency in terms of how we operate with customers and to make things easier. If there's a spark, you can set a bank on fire because of all the paper we have. But there's been a lot of improvement, and today digitalization allows us to make this path simpler. Complementing to what they have said and talking about the startups that you have mentioned, that there are more and more and even better, and we are positively surprised by all the projects we are seeing, and we will start getting to know through the credit. But how these companies can use us. Today, banks have platforms at disposal of those companies to reach out to other clients, to more clients, and have better sales. So we can improve, we can help you improve. So banks are willing to lend, companies need to popularize themselves, and there are platforms that today unite those ecosystems. That's the big value the financial system can provide these startups, thanks to the technological development. And one additional topic that you've mentioned, or that you have not mentioned, is the question of livestock farming. Sometimes we are always focusing on agriculture, and I think we have a huge livestock sector that has great chances of monetizing, and I think we have the necessary legal framework on this that we can provide more credit. I think livestock farming has a lot of room for growth as a driver for growth in the country. And we have very clear that we have to have a very targeted proposal to this sector. This long-term, sometimes there are long-term projects. How do I can help you monetizing the different types of cattle and make the chain more efficient? There, I think there's a big opportunity. I would like to add something to what Nico has just said. With reference to startups and the new platforms, I think banks are going to be more integrated to the system, and complementing with these new technologies to reach the farmer. I think the future lies in, for example, you have a platform and you follow your management through this platform. Well, that is going to be an information that will be connected to the bank. You nourish that information, or you nourish your accounting with the information from the data you collect, and you provide that information to the bank. There are actions that you have to take, or there are certain transactions. So there should be more and more communication in these systems, in the digitalized system, to make things simpler. I think that's the way forward. The big changes that we see forward, I see them on this side, on the interaction of platforms. There are 250,000 farmers. Digitalization should not be a barrier for income. I think we should use the best of both worlds. I know that you like to go to the brick-and-mortar branch, but I think that you have to complement digitalization with proximity. Those are two important things. This sector demands from us or asks from us, why don't you come to the field? Why don't you visit me? But that has to be complemented with the digital ecosystem. It doesn't have to be 100% digital when you talk with a chatbot, because we had that experience and it did not work. But on the other hand, the second kind response, I throw the telephone away. At least he should mistreat me. We want to be close to we are commercial banks. We love being close to customers, but we also want to make our processes more efficient. The fund or the loan is merely a vehicle, and the relation is still there to think what else we can do together with all the different products a bank can offer, and also how to integrate all that you have mentioned, because 250 farmers. I think there are less farmers than that. But regardless of that, yeah, the ecosystem is very populated. But if you combine the best of digital processes and digitalization with that last mile of a person can contribute with, that is a combination that we see that works. Because you cannot be adding more and more people into the context because it's less efficient. But service digitalization is what allows you to scale and allows you to improve service for the smaller sectors that are left outside. And let me share with you a personal anecdote on this regard. Once we went with a group of companies. We went to visit some minister. I'm not going to mention them. I'm ecumenical with different political movements, but he said, I'm going to give you the permits one by one. But why don't we do something more general? If speaking about the digital contact, no, you can ask for the permits. If you ask for one permit, we give you the service through one person. If you request 10 permits, we provide 10 people for permit for the 10 permits, so on and so forth. I have one last question, and then we will open the floor. I think Argentina will double their agricultural production. When we talk about beef, there's a wide variety, including swines, and we are going to focus on 2 World Cups. In the 90s, there were sectors that dropped. I'm crazy about the dairy sector. Argentina is amazing. We invented the cow. We called it Orlando, Argentina, and we are not leaders in the dairy sector. But we need to dynamize that sector. I see that there are new crops and with a lot of different applications. And now, are you noticing the new dynamic in the sector that is not just corn and wheat, new products, new sectors, and also the people that have been left behind? Let me start off by talking about the dairy sector. When I went to college, I think the production is still the same. You won World Cup, so on and so forth, but the business itself remains the same. We have not growth on that regard. There's a big opportunity there, and there are necessary conditions for growth here. But there are a certain number of wrong policies with powder milk. We did everything that was possible to put all types of obstacles. Yes, that's the case. And the other thing is that we have a wider variety of crops. It's not just commodities. Commodities is the biggest volume, but we see more specialties. There are new crops appearing, companies that start adding value to that allows you to diversify with different alternatives. So it's interesting. and also complementary models. You speak about a swine production that has certain concentration silos, but there are other integration models. Those who produce vegetable protein can complement it with animal protein, and they make combinations, and they are very interesting opportunities and a great potential because we produce everything that is required. We tend to talk to the farming sector, especially to the agricultural sector, and not to the other business units, and we have to change that. I think that, going back to the question, in this naturalization or normalization, there will be more projects because they are going to be more integrated. I think that's the way forward. Where it begins and how far the project go, and how from the financial sector we can help them. And this is something that calls us all to action: traceability, sustainability, and we also want to go deeper into that green funding that the market or the world is demanding from us. Perhaps in Europe, in the United States, are a bit advanced, but in Argentina is already here, is something that we are already seeing it. But I think it goes hand in hand with these new chains, these old new business units that reappear. I'm thinking about the opportunity in the dairy sector, and there's a need for plasticity, flexibility. Sometimes we say a fixed rate in pesos. At a certain point, we talked to dairy producers, and we conducted an analysis. The price of milk had a direct correlation with swine. You have to be ready to analyze a different type of financing. Is there any indicator? There is a productive indicator that's a result of the absence of a strong currency. Well, let's take into account other parameters, sometimes we say. But when we look at the essence of a bank, there is an arbitration between excess and lack. If I have to be providing or paying this I think it's a big opportunity to take decisions that are very difficult, especially in activities such as the dairy sector that is long-term with a lot of passion. When cycles change, it's difficult, but it requires to be more flexible. I think these good times will appear. The UVA is a good alternative. We have to think about it. Let me talk about sustainability. We are all on this sustainability train. And you sit to negotiate with big companies, they all have the same agenda as a priority. And from my point of view, I think that action has to be within an ecosystem. We see we are going to work with the whole of the supply chain, and we will accompany the producer to conduct an activity that is more eco-friendly. This is something that they start demanding from us. I don't think there's anybody who hasn't heard about this. And initiatives shouldn't be unique. We have to make it simpler and be the opening access or the entrance access to show producers how they do things and help them in the process to generate more information. And that cannot be done by a bank alone or a company alone. I think it's important to integrate the different players. And we are already seeing this integration to support the producer in the process. He is at the core of the chain. They are the ones to generate the production, and he has to be able to show how they do it.
Los precios van a ser muy
Yes, and not too far in the future, the prices will not be so different. The financing of a farmer that does things more sustainably and with more traceability will probably be better than for those farmers who are not doing this. So I think that the world will be showing this, or is already showing this. And in Argentina, I don't know when, but we believe that we will probably reach this point and not so far into the future. My last question first. You are triggering this question, actually. I thought that was already in place, that, a better rate for those who do sustainable agriculture. No, I mean, what I hope there will be, like before, where there were incentives because they improve the capital costs, or different ways, or the bank can be incentivized to have a lower cost. But that would be fantastic, of course, if that was the case. But now, since I have a policy of wanting to grow along this green line with less profitability, this is how I would go about it. Okay, but personally, I don't know if this administration will do something special for this line, because it doesn't do special lines for anything. That's my personal opinion. But regardless of that, if banks in general have a policy of promoting sustainability or supporting sustainability, carbon footprint, sustainable practices, etc., they do it for a better world? Or, this is the question, do they also measure that a sustainable practice may be more profitable sometimes? And what is the difference between someone who does a sustainable practice and maybe wins more money or earns more money because they install a solar panel and they spend less on electricity? How does the bank differentiate? Do they have a better rate? Well, two things. Sustainability actually improves productivity in Argentina. There are clear examples. So it didn't come with a restriction, at least until this moment. We might have markets that start closing if we don't start doing things differently. In other regions, this has happened a long time ago. So we must have incentives that are well balanced and with clearly defined roles. I mean, sustainability through credit and the role to incorporate it, I think, has to be on the other side. I mean, we can't control that because we won't control it correctly. We have to promote sustainability through credit by giving conditions that are adequate for that credit. But I think that there has to be a good balance between the different factors. So in the short term, I don't know. There may be incentives in the side, but I think there should be a good narrative in the sense, in terms of the return, and incentives will come and will follow. I mean, to say cheap sustainable credits, I think that's sort of being a bit cheap. I think that it's better to... Well, in my house, they might say those things. But you have to decide what type of support do you want for the process. You have to choose the one that best accompanies your view, your vision, and we will see dedicated funds. We already have investment funds, which are specifically green funds that you operate, that, they are sustainable, green, social. So that is starting to appear. It is just the beginning, but it dynamizes the process, of course. The truth is that Argentina comes from being very closed up to the world. But when you look at multilateral credit organizations, they all have requirements on that side. So, you start seeing opportunities for that type of credit. You will not be allowed to do it without certain requirements. And those requirements will come from the way in which you're doing things, regardless of whether you're doing, what happens in the markets that you will access. And in my point of view, we might wonder, why do we incentivize this? Because we want to have a portfolio of clients that will be able to access those markets. These are the clients that will prosper over time. And we can see net patrimony flows, balances, etc. But the true and actual wealth is not only reflected in certain things. You will see it further down the line. So you have to pay attention to that, and that's a thing that we can do. It's much more long-term than just to see it in an indicator to qualify a client immediately. So I think we would have to treat differently a client that does certain practices than a client that doesn't. And of course, we need to mention these requirements, but I don't think they should be on the side of the bank. I think that you should have this, but on the other side, you should also have certain protocols and certain unification of criteria. You may measure with one instrument or the other and have different results. So there are different roles, and I think Aapresid can play a role, definitely, in what is being done in relationship to carbon. I think that's interesting about Aapresid. But, there are a lot of things. Let me be the devil's advocate for just a minute. It's so costly for anyone who's just starting with this that they need to have a hand from someone. If not, it's really too complicated. Their own, farm, and they're trying to do things right. It's all, uphill. And they will need support. So if the government will not give it to them, then it will probably be the banks. I think that the companies are supporting, and there's an effort to generate the information, not so much the cost. You have a platform and you have to measure the hectares, but we have seen cases where sometimes you're giving something away and even then people don't come and pick it up. There's a whole process and it requires different efforts that need to be construed. We only have a few minutes, but I'm becoming like Luis Majul. I'm interrupting everyone. I will ask a question. And there are people recovering from the drought, from this big hit, from the taxes, a lot of reasons, to start this recovery. What about credits to rebuild the process for someone who has been hit hard by the crisis? They always silence me when I want to talk. Nico said something about this. In the last crop season, banks played a key role to help our clients reshape their working capital. We just passed, or a new law was just passed, which will allow to mobilize credits more quickly. There are many companies like CCGRs, which are companies that we do not consider competitors. They are our allies. And they help us leverage the system. It's working really well, and I think we need to really focus on that. And they've worked together with the banks. There's a major opportunity there to grow. And I think that banks are fully prepared to do this and to understand the business, because we understand the business, and it's not just a snapshot, it's a whole movie. We have 1 minute left. Can I tell a farmer who is just starting out, they're just starting in this crazy endeavor, because we see drones, we see things, I love the new things that are happening, but can a farmer think, or can a guy with not much money go to a bank and say, I have this project, I want to do this. Will you receive them? Will you help them out? Should they go to you? Yes. they should come to our branches and discuss the project, because the credit will probably grow as the project grows and as the business grows, of course. But like I said before, banks must be used as a service platform to be able to showcase the product and commercialize it better. I do not want to be a party pooper, but I'm interested in startups if it's high risk capitals. It's not what they're looking for in a bank. They need an investor, but they will be able to accompany them with a different level of risk. A bank, you ask for money, but you have to give it back. And with an investor, it's a different scheme. They will require a high return on investment, but they're taking the risk of that failing. So I think that it depends on where that new company is, where that startup is, what is their flow, and whether that's a reality and whether there's a business flow already, and if we can start financing them after that stage, or if it's just an idea and what they're needing is someone to give them risk capital. It's different, really, because it's the way things work. Martín? I think that for this type of projects, we have to use the financial tools that exist in addition to banks. It's different to have a partner than to have a bank when you embark in a project. Okay, guys, we've reached the end. It's like those interviews when they say it's over, but our time is up. Thank you very much. Argentina is on its way up. We have to feed 8 billion people in the world. They have to eat 4 times a day. So the whole planet is waiting. We have a major challenge ahead of us. Thank you for being here, and have a good afternoon.